Borak Thung, Earthlets, and welcome to another episode of 2000 AD, The Deep Dive. I am Molchar, and it's wonderful again to be chatting away to your deep dive host, Steve. Fantastic couple of episodes so far, one on Devil in War and one on The Out. Some really great feedback. What's it been like sort of seeing people's reaction to diving down into the archive?
It's been brilliant. There's a mix of people who are going, "Oh, this brings back so many memories for me, the characters I used to love." There's people going, "Oh, I can't believe that all this stuff happened with the characters I used to read. I need to get back and see what's been happening recently." It's really nice to hear people, responding well to it and getting excited about these characters that last just as well now as they did when they first came out. They're still just exciting to read in the modern day as they were when they first got published.
And I mean, subjects for this show are near infinite, considering we've done 48 years of publishing comics. But we're moving on with this episode to one that if you know 2000 AD, you know who this character is. So, do you want to introduce the subject of the this episode of the deep dive?
Yes, this week we're going to be talking about Rogue Trooper, the genetic infantryman.
Huzzah! Huzzah! One of 2000 AD's longest standing characters, one of its most popular, the subject of an imminent motion picture written and
Mm.
directed by Duncan Jones of Moon and Warcraft fame. Yeah, I mean, so many stories, not just the original Gerry Finley-Day and Dave Gibbons ones, but all the way through Gerry's run. There's the whole phase of the hit, which is the where the character kind of became an intergalactic assassin, and then of course the reboot written by Dave Gibbons and drawn by Will Simpson, and then the Friday era and everything. So it's so much to get your teeth into. But you're going to concentrate very much at the beginning with this episode, aren't you?
Frankly, there is too much Rogue Trooper to cover. Thank you very much. There is so much to do at once that we're going to stick to the earlier stories for the time being. We're planning to do a series on Rogue Trooper. There's so much to him that he can cover 2 or 3 episodes of this just by himself, let alone Friday. We're going to stick to the original run by Gerry Finley-Day, Dave Gibbons, Colin Wilson, Cam Kennedy, and I'm sure more. Brett Ewins is in there
Yeah.
too. And we're going to be covering roughly the sort of stories that you'll see in, the lovely Complete Road Trooper Volume 1, which is out this month. We thought it's a very good time to be talking about Road Trooper with the launch of that title.
Almost as if it were planned.
It'd be a
Hmm.
first, wouldn't it? But yeah.
Oh, it would. It would very much so.
Mm.
I'm terrible. Well, that's fantastic. And who's your guest on this episode?
My guest is Steve Baxi, who's a comics critic and writer who's known for working at sites like The Beat and has recently been turning himself into a bit of a rogue trooper aficionado. He read the original stories, he's been reading Blighty Valley, he's written some very good articles on both of them and talking about the nature of war and how future warfare reflects our interest in past warfare. So there's some really good articles that he's written on The Beat, which I recommend you have a look at after this. But he's got a lot to say about Road Trooper, so a perfect guest to bring in for the first part of our series on the character.
Fantastic. Well, we're looking forward to hearing what he's got to say, and you, of course. And it's also great that to take your time with Rogue Trooper because he is a character, considering relatively not one dimensional, but a relatively straightforward character.
Mm.
There's so many different stories that have been told in so many different ways. So yeah, looking forward to this one. The deep dive will be back in a month's time. It's always the second Saturday of the month. The fourth Saturday of the month is the 2000 AD Creator Tapes. This month's will be the second part of our huge Simon Bisley interview. And of course, don't miss me and Chloe Maville on In Orbit every Wednesday. Every Wednesday. And if you're listening to this episode when it goes out, Steve joins us on that episode, weirdly, in a kind of, I think I refer to it as a Bert and Ernie kind of thing.
Yes, yeah. I think you meant Eric and Ernie, but Bert and Ernie also works. So I'm happy with that.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, looking forward to hearing lots of thoughts on Rogue Trooper. Make sure you subscribe on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcasts or the podcast app of your choice, Earthlets. Head along to 2000ad.com/newsletter, where you'll be able to sign up for weekly updates about the galaxy's greatest comic. And in the meantime, let's crack on with the galaxy's greatest podcast. This is the 2000 AD Deep Dive with Steve Morris and special guest talking about Rogue Trooper.
Borg Fung Earthlets. This is Steve. I'm back with another 2000 AD deep dive into the classic catalogue of comics from the galaxy's greatest comic. This time round, I am joined by another very special guest from the world of comics. He is a critic, a writer who's written for various websites, including most currently, I believe, The Beat and Shelf Dust, which is a website I hear is quite good. He is Steve Baxi. Steve, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'm really excited.
It's brilliant to have you on because today we are talking about Rogue Trooper. Now, this isn't a particularly deep dive, you could argue. He's one of our most famous characters. But yourself, you've been going deep into Rogue Trooper for a little while now, and I've been reading a bunch of his old stories. Can you tell us a bit about your history with Rogue Trooper and what appeals to you about the character?
Yeah, it was very recent. The thing about hobbies is that hobbies are very expensive, and so you look for the best bang for your buck. And a lot of my friends have been getting into the 2000 AD progs on a regular basis because it's such a good deal for comics. And so I decided if that's going to happen, I'll go through their back catalog because that's how my brain works. I need to know everything. So I went back to the start and tried to find stuff that would appeal to me. And because comics is a visual medium, the thing that really stuck out to me was a piece of Cam Kennedy art of Rogue Trooper. It's one of the posters that you see basically everywhere, where he's got his blaster and he's just running at you. And I just thought the blue skin and the sort of futuristic rifle, the kind of cyberpunk aesthetic of the world, mixed with the very sort of gruff military aesthetic, was so captivating that I had to go out and read it. And then learning what the premise is, it's maybe the most metal thing I've ever read. Of all your buddies dying, they're talking to you in your head while you try and get revenge for them. It's one of those things that's just like a pure emotional experience. It's aesthetically pleasing. It's just an angry comic about how awful the world is. And I went through and I bought all of the Rogue Trooper tale collections, and I've been reading through all of them for the last few months. And it's turned out to be like one of my favorite war comics, particularly from that era.
It's surprising, isn't it? You know, you think of Rogue Trooper, he is this bright blue character with the gun. It looks very over the top, very silly in a lot of ways. You could argue, but you start reading the comics, and well, I mean, it's created by Gerry Finley-Day and by Dave Gibbons, and neither of them have any interest in having it be just silly and just throwaway. They actually want to tell stories of war, just in a very different setting to one that we're used to.
Yeah, what's always really appealing about the early Dave Gibbons art before he leaves the book is he's so interested in making sure that you get a sense of scale between how small the conflict is and how massive its consequences are across the whole planet of New Earth. The idea that we took an entire world and made it functionally unlivable, but we're still going to fight over it for largely in the early issues no reason whatsoever. And the only way to survive on the planet is to become the least human thing possible, which is the genetic infantrymen. Gibbons has a really good way of making you see that Rogue is. He's not meant to be very cool. He's not meant to be very heroic. He's just a being that's birthed from the consequence of having to do this. And when he shows up, he's not meant to be your savior. He's just almost like the war zone spirit or karma coming in and setting things right, but he's just going on his own way. And those early Gibbons issues do a really good job of saying that the humanity of Rogue Trooper is that the world is so messed up, And Rogue, the least human looking guy imaginable, is maybe the most human because he appreciates that dissonance.
It's right from the start. We should go back to the start in a second, but right from the start, Rogue is obviously he goes rogue and he's not part of either side of the conflict. Essentially, he's got his side that he's technically working for, but they don't trust him either. So he's looking at the war from a very detached perspective almost from the
Hmm.
start. He's there to comment on both sides of things, but he doesn't really want to get involved in anything. He's got his own little personal mission he wants to follow, but he's not particularly interested in the wider scale of the conflict apart from what he sees as being good in the moment and what he sees as being bad in the moment and what needs to be fixed right now.
Yeah, he's got his own specific code and his own moral center, and the goals of the larger war have really nothing to do with that moral center. And on occasion, if the war aligns with that mission, then it'll help out. But he really just cares about getting that traitor general. He just really cares about saving his buddies. And when you get those early chapters where they go through one at a time how each of his friends lost their bodies, and then he started plugging them into his equipment, you get like this sense of almost PTSD with him where he can't help but continue on with this mission because he's constantly haunted by the people that he wasn't able to save. And the reason he couldn't save them is because you can't stop the war. Stopping the war, fighting the war, none of that at the end of the day has anything to do with his connection to his friends that he's unable to lose. And that element of it where he's always going to be ostracized from the soldiers on either side because he's not helping them fight their agenda always makes it so he's always narrowly focused in on his equipment, his bag, his hat, his gun, and you get like this really special bond between them. But it's also one of those things where it's on a time crunch. There's only so long before those chips are going to decay. There's only so long before what maybe somebody gets lucky and ends up killing them, and none of that at the end of the day has had anything to do with ending the war, because ending the war doesn't get your friends back. Ending the war just gives you maybe a temporary situation where you still have to find whoever the traitor general is before he even really knows it's a general. But it doesn't save your friends. It doesn't save the planet. It just perpetuates all this.
It's a very British take on the war story. This
Hmm.
comes in 1981. It was first published, so that means that this came after a lot of different publications. So, Action, Battle would both have started by this point. The War Picture Library would have been out by now. And I think Dave Gibbons may have worked on some of those comics in the past. Gerry Finley-Day certainly did,
Hmm.
and in British comics, I'm thinking of things like within Battle, you've got Charlie's War, and in particular, which is a very much focused on one man's journey through the war, and he's grasping onto all the personal possessions he's got, which in war basically means your hat, your bag, your gun, maybe your comrades. And so Road Trooper is a very natural extension of what's come before, I think, in British comics, but extends it out into the fantastical, into the sci-fi genre, which hasn't been seen as much at that time. I think you've in the past talked about Road Trooper as being kind of one of the first future war comics that was actually released that was talking about things not as a superheroes versus goodies and baddies, but more people in a war, just on a future planet in a different setting in a world you're not used to. Is that
Yeah,
something that appealed
yeah.
to you? Yeah.
It's a really fun idea because you have to extrapolate from that present moment. And in the 80s, obviously, there's a lot going wrong, regardless of what country you're in at that point. And so you get stuff like Mobile Suit Gundam in the late 70s and early 80s, which is all about a perpetual future war that never goes away. Every new story in the Gundam franchise is just. And we know the war was won last time, but here's how the war started all over again, and the same sides reappear. Uh, and Rogue Trooper kind of fits into that same sort of scheme. You have it coming out in the early 80s, and then after that, you've got this series of dystopian sci-fi properties that get really popular. Things like Blade Runner, then inspiring stuff like Ghost in the Shell and Akira and all that. And it's interesting to think about in the context of Rogue Trooper, where the sci-fi is never portrayed as being wonderful. Even when you look at something like Gundam, at the end of the day, you look at a giant robot, and giant robots with lightsabers are cool. There's no way around that. You
Hmm.
watch Star Wars and lightsabers and the Force and Darth Vader, they're the spaceships. It's all a spectacle on one level or another. But Rogue Trooper doesn't really have that, and everything you're looking at is it's barren, it's decayed. None of the technology is sexy or appealing. None of it is stuff that you'd want to repurpose in modern day life for whatever reason. All of it is very sort of brutal. Everything is very sort of bare bones functional, smacking things on top of each other and creating these very interesting designs, but not necessarily aesthetically appealing designs. Uh, and sandwiching Rogue in the middle of that is really cool because again, you got like this big blue guy who could be a superhero, and he's not. You know, he's just wearing fatigues. He's just got his helmet and gun in his backpack. He's not costumed really in any sort of way. He's not even really uniformed in either army's outfits for most of the series, and so creating this world that feels so devoid of anything optimistic is very fascinating up until you get to this poison plant prog, where the only thing that can grow on the planet is now something that's toxic to its inhabitants, and it becomes this really depressing moment of the only way life is going to be able to sustain on New Earth is if it kills everybody else, because up until this point all everyone else has done is killed the planet, and so there's no beauty to be found here. There's nothing that's a spectacle. None of the action scenes really have this sort of let's get the biggest monster and the biggest robot fighting each other. It's all very how do we survive at every turn.
And in this first run of stories, which we're going to be looking at today, it's basically Road Trooper going on a journey across New Earth to show us the different districts, different areas of it, to show what it's like when you're, out at sea, what the seas look like there, what the jungles look like there, what the desert looks like, and what the woods. It's very much Road Trooper going on this sort of journey across New Earth to kind of go, what new horror have we got to show you today? And everything is horrible.
Yeah, everything is horrible. Everything feels very disconnected too. You never really get a sense of how does one area lead into the next because everything in between is essentially just a mess.
Hmm.
Um, in those early stories in particular, I mean, Rogue is essentially fighting uh, an opposing army that's basically Nazis, basically space Nazis.
The
Um,
Norts.
yes, the Norts, and they're very comedic because they're so incompetent, but they also have probably the most competent technology, I would say. They're the only ones who are designing stuff like the Dreamweaver. This idea of projecting what your mind desires out into the field, and that seems like maybe something that might be appealing in a broader sense. But because it's being used to remind the Southerners of the things that they can't have anymore, the things that are not possible, it
Hmm.
takes on this very insidious quality. So in those early string of stories, all Rogue seems to be doing is he's going from area to area. He's being reminded of the humanity that the soldiers have lost, in part because of the opposing army, and then he's reminded of the humanity that he never had to begin with because he was genetically engineered, and the humanity that his friends are never really going to be able to have, even if they get their bodies back. And so every time you get into what different aspects of New Earth looks like, you always have this idea in the back of your mind of even if this was appealing, who's going to be there to enjoy it? Or what is there to actually enjoy about it? Because there's no government, there's no peace, there's no indigenous people. It's all just barren battlefield.
And the comic is very careful in a way to not give you much context at all for what's happening. It takes a long time to work out what Rogue's up to, what his plans are, why he's up to
Mhm,
them. And also, we never see him anywhere near. In a war story, there's always the idea of like we're going to take the enemy base, we're going to find the general, we're going to stop
mhm.
the war, and there's no way for him to stop this war. He is on New Earth, which is this barren, toxic planet, which is radioactive to humans. They've all got to wear masks to keep themselves protected, and Road Trooper is. He's got no protection on his face. He's the only person who's able to breathe the atmosphere walking around, and he's not really seeing anything of particular interest or value apart from just this brutality of war. Um, and this is a really bleak way of looking at it, I suppose, from us, because this is also a comic which has lots of, you know, incredible things to show us, amazing designs on vehicles and modern military weapons and all sorts of things like that. But it does all come back to, at the end of the day, like, this is a purposely pointless world that he's in, much like
Mhm.
Mega City 1, where Dread's around. There's this feeling of this is a hopeless situation, and no one's really going to push through this and find a better day, better world. We are stuck in this, and the only thing that's really going to happen is people will die on this planet, and then maybe the leadership will be happy. Maybe they won't, but
Yeah.
it doesn't make a difference to people on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, you get the sense that the goal that Rogue has to find the traitor general who betrayed all the other genetic infantrymen that were killed early on, and to rescue the chips of his friends by putting them into actual bodies again. All of that is just his way of dealing with how does he keep waking up in the morning and finding something to do. Because you could very just as easily say, let the dead be the dead, which he does for other people and other troops who are not genetic infantrymen. You could also just write off the idea that whoever betrayed the genetic infantrymen and had them all killed, they're probably eventually going to die in the hands of this war anyway, so what's the point? But instead of diving into that in action, he has to animate his life by finding some sort of goal. And the bare bones of it is just, how do I satisfied with my friends wanted, and give myself a mission, which is just tracking down the general. And because he's giving it to himself as opposed to being told it from a faceless army, it has a little bit more meaning to him. It's a lot more personal, and it's a lot more human because it's not you just going along with as a cog in the rest of the war. It's very much grounded in the kinds of values that Rogue himself has that are antithetical to either side of the war. The early stories where everyone is surprised to see him, what I really like about those is that the Norts and the Southerns are both very equally scared of him. If he gets captured, he's going to be taken in as a traitor. Or if the Norts get him, they're just going to kill him. But everyone is equal parts terrified of him. No one is welcoming of him. No one really wants to help him, except maybe in the heat of the moment where they need him to survive. His presence is essentially kind of like a third party in this war, and no one knows what to do with it because they don't really know what he's up to at the end of the day. He's not explaining himself very much. He's not talking with the other military members, at least not early on. And that element of chaos makes him a little bit more interesting too, because you don't get a sense of peace or even sort of like karmic justice at the end of any of these stories. A lot of it is, at the end of the day, the conflict itself is pointless. The lives that are lost for no reason, and the only way that Rogue can carry on is because he's convinced himself that he's found a purpose. And then you might even ask yourself, what is he going to do after he accomplishes his purpose? And the comic very bluntly is, well, kind of nothing. After he accomplishes his purpose, there's really not much else to do.
It's very much a Jerry Finley-Day comic, for the first half of these early stories as well, where, like you say, he's going from place to place, he's meeting troops, and they don't trust him, and no one knows what to expect of him. Something happens, he does the right thing. Usually, he moves
Hmm.
on to the next place. It's very episodic.
Hmm.
There's another story that ran previously called Invasion, which is about a British, like an invasion of the British Isles, basically by this foreign nation called the Volgans. And it's about this one truck driver whose family are killed in the bombing. And so he picks up a shotgun and he starts fighting back a guerrilla war. And again, it's a very, Jerry Finley writes most of those early stories. And it's very much, here is a setup, here is a conclusion, on to the next thing. With Rogue Trooper, that is the case for at least a good half of his first few, his first stories. Then we get to, I believe it's Ascent to Buzzard Free, which is the story where he finally tracks down the traitor general who betrayed him when he first was dropped onto the planet. And it's at that point that the series starts becoming more of a serialized comic. It must be at that point they must have gone, oh, we're onto something here. This is popular. People are enjoying this. Because at that point, the stories get longer. You get more multi-part stories, and you get more of
Mhm.
this long, ongoing narrative. I mean, in a sense, Buzzard Free, this is the story where um, he finds the satellite orbiting the planet, where there are four major generals, all just living there and you know coordinating their plans. And he knows one of them is the guy who sold him out. He doesn't know which one of them it is. Very quickly, things go south. Three of them detach in their escape pods, which get blown up on the way back to the planet. And one escape pod lands on the planet. And so Rogue Trooper knows that is the traitor general. I now know where my enemy is. I don't know what he looks like. I don't know who he is. But I've got a trail to follow now. And at that point, the series becomes more of a let's go try let's get a purpose for Rogue Trooper. Let's give him this goal. And he doesn't really get fleshed out much himself, but the biochips that are attached to his weaponry, as I think it's at that point they start getting personality. Um,
Yeah, if I remember right, it's around that time when Bagman's chip starts to deteriorate.
yes, yeah,
And they can't access their equipment when they need to. He's saying weird gibberish things. Um, and you get a story around that time too where Rogue has to essentially lie to each of his friends about some part of their past to kind of keep them as a cohesive unit. And you get this sense of like now there's pressure, now there's a ticking time bomb, now there's the realization that you can delude yourself into finding this mission, but the more you do it, the closer you are to your friends just out and out dying at that point. And so he's got much more urgency in capturing the traitor general. Um, and if the trader general part is also interesting because at least in the first few progs, you don't know who the person that sold out the infantrymen are. The realization that it was both a traitor and a high-ranking military official, that sort of double whammy that justifies why Rogue went rogue in the first place, is really interesting because you get the sense that is the Trader General really any different than the other three guys in the room at that point? And if he could do it, what's to stop the rest of the generals from eventually getting to this exact same spot? And so there's a bleakness to that, where of course it was all homegrown to begin with, and then there's that urgency of well now I got to save my friends as soon as possible, and you get these really great multi-part stories where Rogue's going through this one town and everyone has just adopted a different Earth time period to model their army after. And you get to see this nostalgia for war show up, where if your entire existence is being a soldier and your entire existence is a perpetual war, then the only things you have to look forward to or to look back fondly on are other depictions of war throughout existence. And that sort of like that sort of vicious cycle of Rogue being reminded of the conflict is never ending, but it's going to end for me someday because my friends are going to die. That's really powerful, I think.
it's a very again, it's a very British perspective on war and war comics. I feel, the British mindset. This is not getting too political, but we do tend to have a history of rose tinting war,
Hmm.
and going. We know that war is bad. We know that war is wrong. But then again, we were on the correct side of the war, and it wasn't it a great time when everyone was on the same page and we all agreed that this was the enemy and this was the goodie, and things are more complex and more difficult now. Um, and when you look at things, I mean, that's Fort Neuro is that story where
Yes,
they
yes.
see people who are dressed up as French legionnaires, I believe, and
Hmm.
English gentlemen. And I think there's a Romanian army as well. Um, it's a very strange story. That point, Rogue Trooper is going a little bit loopy, which makes it even more entertaining to my mind. But certainly, this idea of looking back on, you know, this is when war used to be civilized and people were, gentlemen and used to duel rather than, think of the worst weapons they can and the most horrible ways to do things. The most iconic weaponry in all of Road Trooper, I would suggest, is not actually gunner or the rifles or any of the weapons like that. It's the living barbed wire which
Oh
shows up
yeah.
and is horrible. It is barbed wire that can sense when there are people nearby, and it goes to find them like a pack of snakes, basically chasing people and wrapping around them. And It's so horrible. It's such a horrible concept. Like, that is one of the strongest, like, strongest futuristic weapons I think I've ever seen any sort of comic. It's so striking. And one thing as well I'd say about this is Rogue Trooper, despite being a bright blue person, his story is originally in black and white.
Hmm.
And I do think that gives you a stronger sense of the horror. It makes it feel more classical. It makes it feel more of a sort of like this is a history being written as you're reading it. Because when you see things like the barbed wire in black and white, they seem so much more vicious and stark as a weapon because of it.
Yeah, the black and white also gives everything a sense of brutality that isn't there if you ever change the to colors. You get a lot of really emotive reaction shots. You have to use your imagination a bit when certain pieces connect, and you kind of feel the pain of it. People getting shot or breaking limbs and stuff. And Rogue too, you get more of an appreciation of his abilities and his physique because he's humanoid, but he's clearly so much more built than any of the other human characters, especially because all of them are always wearing chem suits. And
Mm,
so that visual distinction, it's you can get distracted from it when you're looking at it in color, but when it's just raw black and white, it makes a lot more sense. Um, the all hell breaks loose on Dick's
the
Fort
Dixie
One
front.
or
Yeah.
Dick's, yeah, that elongated story where Rogue is actually hanging out with a lot more of the soldiers in the war, and starting to connect with them, and then at the end of it just ends up getting betrayed anyway. That's another really good example, I think, where you get a very clear sense of every piece of technology that's being designed for this war is impractical for any purpose aside from killing as many people as possible. And that's also the story where that poison plant makes a return because it can incapacitate the genetic infantrymen, and you get that reminder of even something that was designed to live on an unlivable planet will eventually just become another weapon in that cycle. It's not going to get to grow in peace. um, you mentioned the sentient barbed wire. My other piece of sentient technology in this series isn't Gunner either, but Major Magnum, one of the coolest bad
Yes.
guys in the whole series, I feel like. Almost
Hmm.
as good as the general himself, because it reiterates that theme of the traitor general is bad on one level, but there's so many opportunities for every other bit of government brass in this world to be just as bad. And Major Magnum being both a sentient gun, being a ruthless commander, and having himself stuck in the same situation as the other dog chips is just endlessly interesting because it opens up this opportunity for, is Rogue really just one step removed from becoming like this guy? And is everyone in the operation of the military really just a blunt instrument like a gun like this, just in human form? And it really literalizes that. The only misstep I feel like with Major Magnum is that he doesn't stay longer.
Well, he does come back.
Mhm.
But that'd be for another episode, I think. But yeah, he's such a stern, interesting character. I think, despite the fact you've got no face for him, I think having him just be a biochip that you see in the barrel of a gun with a giant M on it
Mhm.
makes it even stronger as a visual for readers. You know, it's this idea of 2D has always been about questioning authority. You know, checking what these people are telling us, and do we trust them? Is this real? Is this what we should we be following orders blindly? Should we be doing what we think is right? And putting Rogue right into that military, leadership position where he's got a boss. Is should he listen to him? Should he follow what he's been told? It's clearly insane, but that guy's in charge technically. So should you follow the code of conduct? It's again, it really layers his world. I think Road Trooper sometimes gets accused as being a little more simplistic, and obviously when you've got things like Judge Dredd or Strontium Dog, and even other war comics like Bad Company that are very well delineated and very carefully put together. Road Trooper still does stand up alongside them because it takes them longer to put in these more challenging ideas, but they do start coming in over time, and they do start making the whole thing more morally questionable and more
Mhm.
more hard to predict as a reader, I think, as well.
Yeah, and you mentioned the world of Rogue Trooper and New Earth being a very good parallel to Mega City One, and they're kind of just they're two sides of the exact same coin. One is just industrialized, and the other one isn't. But they essentially portray the same image of a dystopian future. But Major Magnum is also very akin to the lawgiver. The whole idea that you would just have a gun capable of anything that you call the lawgiver, and on the other hand, you just have a sentient gun that gives you orders and tells you who to kill and who not to kill. They're very
Mm.
similar concepts. I think part of the reason Rogue Trooper maybe falls behind some of the more iconic 2000 AD characters is it's hard to ever feel comfortable at the end of any of those stories in a way where something like Judge Dredd always has like a reset point where every prog that you're reading, you have the status quo, you're introduced to Mega City 1, you're introduced to a judge. At the end of the story, you get that sort of very bleak nihilistic message, but at the end of the day, you're still in something that feels familiar. You're still in a city, you're still surrounded by police officers, you're still in a world, and you kind of reset back to that expectation until
Mm.
the next prog where it all happens all over again. With Rogue Trooper, it's nothing's familiar. Everything is bad, and when the story's over, it's worse, and then the next story picks up right where it left off, and it's also worse.
There's always one more step he's got to take. He's always got to, an episode ends with him saving the day or solving a problem, and then the next story picks up with him 5 meters away from where he last was.
Hmm.
He's probably lying on the ground, having had a rough night's sleep on the soil, Helm as his pillow. He picks up the helmet, picks up the gun, picks up the bag, walks off. Something else is coming. There's always
Exactly.
something more for him, and I think the longer term Road Trooper as well. You've got this long term story that's Gerry Finley-Day is in charge of all of it, and he's got various artists. Dave Gibbons there for the start, but then you've got Colin Wilson, Cam Kennedy, Brett Ewins. There's a and Mike Dory, so many artists to mention, but Gerry Finley-Day very much has control of that story until the point where Rogue and the Trade General finally meet, and then Road Trooper heads back to home base, and there's a sort of reset there. And
Yeah.
the argument is that Road Trooper never really recovers from completing his story arc in that sense. It's not something I fully agree with. I think there's plenty more that can be done with Rogue. There's more that he can search for. But whereas Judge Dredd is a character who can be put into different situations and anything could happen, Road Trooper was very much, it was a journey that had a destination. And he reached destination, and once he hit that destination, a lot of people would just go, "Well, I finished now." And I think that's a very fair way of looking at it. It does make a clear jump off point if you wish to have that.
Yeah, it has a clear narrative conclusion. What's been really nice about the newer Rogue Troper stuff, though, is like the stuff Garth Ennis has been writing, is it's able to return to the status quo without just repeating the stories. Because at the end of the day, the journey that Finley-Day gets us through is very compelling and very interesting. But there's all this time and space between him getting from point A to point B, where you can just tell stories about war in general or the hopelessness of war. Some of the
Mm,
best Rogue Trooper stories I feel like are the ones that don't contribute to that overall constant plot progression. Garth Ennis with Blighty Valley recently is a really good example of that. But also, people forget Alan Moore did two whole stories of Rogue Trooper that don't contribute to the ongoing plot of Finley-Day, and they are some of the best Trooper stories ever because they're just compounding that theme of what exactly are you fighting for and what exactly is a just war. And
mm,
that is an evergreen enough story where I think you could kind of like Judge Dredd always have that sort of reset point of this is what your thematic anchor is, and you can throw this philosophy into different situations over and over again. It's also a little bit like Nemesis the Warlock too, where you've got this clear separation between the world Nemesis is allowed to inhabit at the end of every story and the society itself that he's fighting against. And Rogue Trooper is able to kind of toe that line really well between
mm,
dystopian city and dystopian future without any sort of structural society, without that same sort of humanity at the end of the day. Um, he's a good microcosm of 2000 AD, and I feel like maybe just because he's my introduction to everything that 2000 AD publishes, I feel like he's a good window into. If you like Rogue Trooper, you're gonna like Nemesis. If you like Nemesis, you're gonna like Judge Dredd, and on and on and on.
mm. And I will put a recommendation for you now, based on what you just said. I think you would really like Robusters.
Ooh,
which
yes.
is she's connected to the ABC Warriors. And the ABC Warriors are giant robots that fight capitalism on Mars when they first get introduced. They are literally there to fight corporations that are taking over from the ranchers who are trying to live their lives as honest working men. But the Robust as well also has stories by Alan Moore that sneak in early on as well, which tackle this idea of war and who's fighting for who and why are we even fighting and who's doing that. So that's one I think might be a might be an interesting one to follow on to, perhaps.
Oh,
Um,
absolutely. I'll have to look
yeah.
into that.
And we should also say we are coming towards the end of our deep dive, but Road Trooper, of course, is about to get a major burst of attention as he's going to be the star of a film that comes out next year. It's directed by Duncan Jones, who did Moon and Source Code and Warcraft and all kinds of other films. It stars Anurin Barnard as Road Trooper. It has amongst the cast, I'm going to try and remember off the top of my head, it has Dal McCormack, it has Jack Loudon, and it has Reece Shearsmith as the three biochips. And amongst the rest of the cast, who are as yet unrevealed, you've also got Sean Bean, Diane Morgan, Jermaine Clement, Matt Berry, Asa Butterfield. It's I think it's going to be really interesting to see how people react to when the film comes out, because it's going to jump people straight back onto the world of Road Trooper. And the best thing is that the first stories are some of the best ones with him. So, you can go from watching this it's going to be a more modern film, I imagine, with a more modern take. But readers go back and it's Gerry Finley-Day, it's Dave Gibbons, Colin Wilson, Cam Kennedy. It is really, it stands up, I think, still to this day. So I think that's something I'm really looking forward to seeing is new generations of people have the film as a way to read the classic comics, because classic comics still hold up, I think.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, with Rogue Trooper, you start with Dave Gibbons, but it's always important to remember you don't go downhill from Dave Gibbons. You still got Colin Wilson, you still got Cam Kennedy, Brett Ellis. They've got such great complementary styles that it is
Mm.
genuinely one of the prettiest comics from the '80s.
And the last thing you mentioned there, Brett Ewins, is also the artist for Bad Company, which is another
Mm.
book I would recommend if you like Road Trooper and you think, oh, war's hell. Read Bad Company. War is even more hell than you can imagine. Uh, but Steve, I've got to say thank you so much for coming on to talk about the early days of Road Trooper. We do plan to come back and talk about some of his future adventures as he gets closer to taking down the Traitor General. So if we've not covered the stories you wanted to cover, there is more coming at some point soon. But Steve, where can people find you online? What do you write for? Where are you on social media? Tell us more about where we can find you.
Yeah, and thanks for letting me do this. I love talking about Rogue Trooper at this point. You can find me mostly on Blue Sky. It's just my name, Steve Baxi at dot Blue Sky. That's mostly where I post, and then I've got a Patreon that's also just Steve Baxi, where you can read weekly reviews. I have a Twitter, but it's only there to post links to things I have written, so you can search my name there, but I'm not going to be posting there. And if you see my writing, it'll be on my Patreon. It'll be on Shelf Dust. It'll be on Comics Beat mostly, and then I've got some stuff I've written in the past for Comic Book Herald. Um, so you can find the links to all that on those various social medias.
Mhm. And in particular on Comic Speed, if you've enjoyed hearing Steve's thoughts about Rogue Trooper, which I have, you made me think about a bunch of things I didn't even think about before. Then you've got two articles in particular. One is about Essential Rogue Trooper Volume 1, and the other one is about a Rogue Trooper Blighty Valley, which I would say are some of the best writing I've read about Rogue Trooper in the last few years. Really, really engaging and interesting ideas about the character and what he means, and where his future could lie. So I'd recommend you go track those down as well.
Oh, thank you so
Um,
much.
yeah, but that is it for the deep dive this month. Come back in a month's time, and we'll be talking about something else from the right down in the dark heart of the nerve center, whatever it may be that we deem to talk about. But thank you very much, Steve, for coming on, and thank you guys for listening. We'll talk to you later.
Well, that was fantastic, Steve. So many thoughts on Rogue Trooper.
It's hard to keep them in. You can see why I had to do a few more episodes on this, because you think, oh, he's a bit simple. No, he's not simple. There's a lot to talk about. There's a lot going on in his world.
Yeah. And I mean, you get everything from kind of dark and moody Rogue Trooper all the way through to disco Rogue Trooper
Mm.
in a relatively short space of time as well.
Sadly, we don't get to talk about Disco Rogue. That'll have to be next time. We'll focus largely on Disco Rogue and then maybe get onto other parts. But Disco Vogue Trooper first.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We'll be back. Well, you'll be back in a month's time to continue the discussion and the dive down into the archive of 2000 AD. Join us on Wednesday for In Orbit every Wednesday, Earthlets. And until next time, from myself and from the host of the Deep Dive, Steve, it's Splendid Thrig.